welcome to the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I am Amani Jamal, I am the Dean of the school, and I'm so delighted to see you here today for our Dean's Leadership Series. Princeton SPIA alumni are renowned for their unwavering commitment to public service. Educated on the importance of contributing to the public good, they graduate and in uncommonly large numbers either begin or continue careers in government and with NGOs and nonprofits. Who better than to turn to for an analysis of the US Congress that has just begun? While the executive branch has occupied much of our attention over the last 2 months, we would be well served to train our lens as well onto the legislative branch, which is constitutionally charged with serving as a check and balance on the White House. As part of our constructive dialogue series, today's panels seek to find common ground through civil discourse about reflections, reform, and the road ahead. We are fortunate to have with us today 4 former or current members of Congress from both sides of the aisle as our discussants. 3 of them are Princeton SPIA alumni. I am also very happy to note that. Our first panel features former Representative John Sarbanes of the great class of 1984 and former Representative Leonard Lance from the great class of 1982, MPA 82. Congressman Sarbanes, well, okay, I'm gonna stop. Congressman Sarbanes, a Democrat, represented Maryland's 3rd District for 18 years. Earlier this year, he was named a distinguished practitioner in residence at Johns Hopkins University's Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute. And Congressman Lance, a Republican, represented New Jersey's 7th District for 10 years, following 11 years in the State General Assembly and 7 years in the State Senate. The second panel, you're gonna get a double feature today. The second panel features Congressman Brendan Boyle, representing Pennsylvania's 2nd District, and Congresswoman Terri Sewell of Princeton SPIA's great class of 1986, who will be here shortly, from Alabama's 7th District. Now in his 6th term, Congressman Boyle is the ranking member of the House Budget Committee. He's also Vice Chair of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly's Political Committee, we had the honor of hosting last spring, and a visiting lecturer here at Princeton. He also presided over the Super Bowl celebrations in Philadelphia this year. Congresswoman Sewell is in her 7th term. She sits on the House Ways and Means Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, and the Committee on House Administration, where she serves as a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Elections. Thank you all. And thank you to our 4 distinguished public servants for joining us today, and to everyone in attendance for today's event, which is made possible by the Mason Morfitt Fund. Thanks as well to Princeton SPIA's Francis Lee, a professor of politics and public affairs and co-director of the Center for the Study of Democratic Politics, and Razia Iqbal, the John Weinberg Goldman Sachs and Company visiting professor lecturer, who will moderate the second panel. I'm very much looking forward to these discussions, and now I'll turn it over to Francis. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Public servants here in Manila to help us understand the contemporary Congress better and how we got where we are right now. I suspect there are many of us here in this room who are concerned about the balance of power between Congress and the executive branch right now. President Trump has begun his 2nd term with a flood of executive orders that challenge congressional power over federal agencies and appropriations. But concern about Congress's declining power is not new to this administration. It's been a theme for many years. And so I would like to get your reflections on what factors are weakening Congress relative to the executive branch, extending back not just to the present moment, but extending backward in time, and whether there's anything that can be done to strengthen Congress in its relationship with the executive branch.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to thank the Dean for her opening remarks, and I want to thank Spia for giving me a reasonably decent education to progress toward to the world. So very, very appreciative of that. And sure, this is kind of one of the central questions right now as we think about checks and balances in our constitutional system. What is the role of Congress relative to the executive branch? I think it is absolutely the case that both parties have probably contributed to more power flowing into the executive branch over the last 10, 15, 20 years than is healthy for that balance of power. I think there's many contributing factors to that. I think you start with the fact that every president, every executive wants to pull towards them as much power as they can reasonably, they can get away with a straight face, let's put it that way. I also think that the more gridlock has occurred in the Congress, and we'll probably talk about all the various reasons that's happened over time, it gives an excuse to the executive to step in. Because if you can't get things accomplished through the legislative process and the public gets kind of frustrated, pick your topic, immigration is an example. You're not solving it through the legislative branch, but we have this pent up expectation as the public, as your constituents, that something meaningful will be done. Then the public is more prepared to concede authority and power to the executive to take action and kind of fill that vacuum. So as you see more gridlock and in the views of some kind of lack of functioning in the legislative branch in Congress, I think that gives an opening to the executive to do more. Now, in this instance, clearly you have someone who, by dint of personality and worldview, is going to come in regardless of what the preceding power balance was and push as hard as they possibly can to pull power to the executive in ways that, in my view, are exceeding the boundaries of authority on any given day. But I think those are some of the dynamics that flow into the equation.
Well, thank you for having me, Dean. I appreciate it. There will be 4 members of Congress. I am the Republican. It reminds me when I was first here as a student, Ronald Reagan was running for president, and I indicated I would be voting for Governor Reagan for president. And another student in our class came up to me, he'd been in the military, and he was a little older than the rest of us, and he said that, yes, he too would be voting for Ronald Reagan, but if I were to tell anybody, he would break both of my legs. Congress has clearly ceded power that it should not have ceded, and this has happened over a long period of time. And it is the responsibility or the dereliction of responsibility of both political parties, and I don't see how anybody could conclude otherwise. Regarding the current administration, and I've stated this several times today in student groups, I think that's going to resolve itself to some extent because my party is going to lose the House of Representatives next year. And when that happens, the Democratic Party will say it's historic and it's magnificent and what a tremendous accomplishment. In every by-election since 1994, the party not controlling the presidency has lost the midterm except for 2002, and that of course was because of the horrific events of 9/11. And so when the Democrats carry the House a year and a half from now, as I expect they will, by a narrow margin, it's not going to be by a tremendous margin, then that will be a check, and then I think there will be, to some extent, greater congressional authority, simply because the White House will have to deal with at least one house of the federal Congress controlled by the other political parties. I also predict that Republicans are going to continue to control the United States Senate, Because as I see it, the targeted races next year in states like Georgia and New Hampshire and Wisconsin and other places are currently controlled by Democrats. So I think they would be defending Senate seats. But long term, it is the responsibility of Congress to reassess itself, particularly in the appropriations process. And I would imagine eventually a court case will reach the Supreme Court on whether or not this president cannot spend money that has been appropriated by the Congress. And I predict that the Supreme Court will rule that no, that it is the Congress's responsibility under Article 1 to appropriate funds, and that funds that have been appropriated have to be spent. So I think there will be a check and balance, as always occurs, and that check and balance will come, I would suspect, in November 2026.
It is great to be back. I had a wonderful experience, and thank you, Dean, for welcoming us back. One of my former students is here. We taught just about 6 doors down this past semester a class essentially in campaigns and elections, campaign management. And that seems like a million years ago because so much has happened since January 20th. Every single day has brought a bewildering array of events. What I would say is that an election, and one of the things we did in this class was pour over an exit poll document that was some 50 pages long, a pretty robust instrument, attempting to look at and determine why voters made the decisions they did. And an election that was largely, more than anything else, about prices being too high and inflation. There has been precious little focus on that the last 2 months. And there has been a focus on almost anything and everything else, including attacks on higher education. So even with all of that, however, going on, at the same time, and I'm saying this especially now as a ranking member of Budget Committee, because the extension of the Trump tax cuts from 2017, that process has to start off in my committee, and it already has with my leading the opposition to it. What's interesting is that we live in this schizophrenic experience because even with all the hoopla and the craziness going on day by day, at the same time, there are those must-pass pieces of legislation like that combined with the budget that also have to get done at the same time. So it has been a whirlwind. Indeed, every single day has brought something different. And as we've seen already, it's at a time of incredibly heightened tensions.
Terri Sewell, your reflections on what you've experienced.
Well, let me also start by just thanking the dean, and it's good to be back home. Class of '86, and I was a SPIA graduate. I have to say, it's so great to see so many of my former classmates and even my teachers. A wife of my teacher, Mrs. Blinder, is here. So it's great to be back. You know, as Brendan said, it has been a very chaotic time. I always like to view what's going on through the prism of the amazing constituents I get to represent. I get to represent my home district. I grew up in Alabama's 7th district. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, my hometown of Selma, Alabama. I'm proud to carry the seminal piece of legislation to restore to its full protections the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I've welcomed the dean and students from SPIA to Selma to march across that bridge with John Lewis and others, and we do it annually, and I'm very proud to keep that legacy of John Lewis alive. We just got back from the 60th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery Bridge crossing. So through the prism of the folks that I represent, median income for a family of 4 in my district is right around $35,000 a year. So I represent vulnerable communities. I know what's possible from those communities with resources and opportunities. I'm a proud product of those communities. And so every day I wake up with a list of things to do, and this administration gives me 4 pages more to work on. Through that prism and through that lens, you know, the uncertainty by which and the haphazard and the speed by which a lot of these changes are going about. I always start my conversations with my constituents by saying we all want efficient government. None of us want waste, fraud, and abuse. But the reality is that a lot of what's going on is going on in such a chaotic way, the manner in which it's going on. I mean, if you're going to review government, have at it, but have a review process by which you are examining various programs and have a criteria by which you're reviewing those various programs and then decide what you're going to do. And instead, we're seeing it that.
The Doge boys and what they're up
Okay,
to.
but at any rate, so glad to be back. Let me just say, I put my seatbelt on every day. It's fast and furious what's going on. But I am a true believer in this great democracy of ours. And I do believe that
It's
this,
a great democracy.
I do, and the greatest in the world. And I do believe that this too shall pass. It's how it passes and what it leaves behind, what rebels it leaves behind.
Leonard, if I may, I mean, you're not in the fray at the moment. How do you reflect on it as an observer?
There are days when I wish I were there, and then there are days I'm glad I'm not there. I had the honor of serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee. My distinguished colleagues may disagree that the two most important committees in the House are Ways and Means and
And
Energy.
since there are two Ways and Means members, so
And-
one energy and
and
commerce.
Energy and Commerce. And the party not controlling the presidency has won the House, with the exception of 2002, and that was clearly because of the horrific events of 9/11. So I would be surprised if the Democrats were not to control the House, and then that will be further redressed. And then, and then beyond that, Professor, we go almost immediately to the races for the presidential election.
Exactly.
And no matter what the president says, he is not going to be running for a third term. And I think he says it to produce agita in Rachel Maddow. I don't think that he really believes it. And even if he were to believe it, the Supreme Court would not permit it. So
I mean, many things can happen between now and that in any case. He could call a constitutional convention. He could do all kinds of things, right?
a constitutional convention is very difficult to call. That ain't gonna happen either.
Faith at the judiciary and your faith in the judiciary. Because there are many observers who will argue the exact opposite, which is that the judiciary has become politicized. So your faith in the judiciary suggests that it is not necessarily rooted in what has actually happened. And given that you are placing your faith in the judiciary, suggests also that it's not plausible if there are many people who argue that the percentage of judges that Trump appointed, and he's continuing to appoint judges who are sympathetic to the Republican Party, that it's unlikely that the redressing of an imbalance is going to happen anytime soon, given that so much of this is being litigated at the moment.
I respectfully disagree. I think judges take an oath to the Constitution, and I have faith in the judiciary, and I have faith in this Supreme Court, and time will tell.
What about the two of you? Terri, what do you feel that the litigation that is taking place is likely to result in the kind of redressing of the imbalance, but also an acknowledgement that you have just made, which is that in some ways Congress has conceded power to the executive?
Well, I am, I'm a lawyer, and I do believe that Justice Roberts cares about his place in history and the court's place in history. And I do believe, as Brendan said, that what happened with the impoundment will actually get adjudicated the same way it did. Now, that's going to all take time. And the problem is that, it's easier to unwind something before it happens, but after it happens, it's going to be harder to put it back together. And that, to me, is going to be the challenge all of us have. But I have to tell you, what we're seeing in terms of executive orders directed at specific law firms and the clients that they take on, we're in a slippery, a dangerously slippery slope when it comes to the rule of law, which has been so paramount to our democracy. And I have to say that really, 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 really concerns me. All of this concerns me. And what's interesting is that I didn't find out that we couldn't sue, that members of Congress, because we don't have standing. It is amazing. So all of the litigation that you see, because my 20-year-old niece is like, so why are you not on a lawsuit? Why are you not a named plaintiff? Because I can't be. I want all of y'all to know that members of Congress cannot be, we don't have standing in suits that deal with actions that we've taken.
We can sign
in
amicus
Congress.
briefs, but
We can
can't
sign
do that.
amicus briefs.
Okay, so part of what you're saying does indicate that there is a kind of a misunderstanding of what Congress is in some ways, right? There's a lot of lack of education, civic education, and I wonder what you think can be done to change that.
I'm
At a very
just a
kind of-
bill, and I'm sitting here. Go back to educating folks about civics.
Well, I've been in Congress now 11 years, and as soon as I figure out what the hell Congress is doing, I'll let you know. Look, no one understands federalism at the local constituent level. I represent about half the city of Philadelphia, from beginning right at the edge of Philadelphia with Bucks County, about 30 minutes from here, all the way down to Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. I have constituent service offices. I'm at the federal level. Guess what? If there's a problem on the street and there's a pothole, they see, oh, government office, we'll go to Brendan's office. The majority of the issues that we will get in our, and this was the case when I was a state legislator as well, the majority of the constituent service issues we had were city issues.
Or county.
You know, if you have a state property tax issue or some sort of DMV
Or zoning
issue, that's at the state. But I use that to symbolize the fact that there are very few of my constituents who know about, think of, or frankly care about federalism. They just look at all of us as, oh, you're the government. And that's where I'm going to go. This came up in the earlier panel, and you've alluded to it here. And I'm going to agree with, it seems like a while ago now, something Leonard said on panel 1.0. And I would say, on a bipartisan basis, for a variety of reasons, if you're to take a step back and maybe have a multi-decade view, I don't think there's any question that over the last at least 25 years of this century, we have seen a migration of powers, especially as it relates to war powers. But in other areas, we have seen a migration of powers to the executive. Because what has happened? It's really hard to get bills passed in Congress.
Right.
We have a non-parliamentary democracy, and yet we have two parties that have purified themselves and are acting like parliamentary parties. And so because we no longer have two heterodox parties, it becomes increasingly challenging to get anything done. That inertia makes it easier for the executive to actually creep and grab powers. And that is something that on a bipartisan basis, Congress should finally address, but it's hard to see what would prompt that
I was just
immediately
going
to
to ask
happen.
you how, yeah, but
Yeah.
I think Leonard wanted to jump in.
I think in the next presidential election, 2028, both candidates should be asked, what is your role in relationship to the other elected branch? And let's say, for example, it's a race between Vice President Vance and Governor Shapiro. I think both are highly intelligent men. Each of them should be asked, do you favor what has happened over the last several presidencies? And it's not just the Trump presidency. President Biden said he was going to govern by pen and telephone, as I recall, or some phrase like that. And we ought to have a fundamental debate, and the presidential candidates, not this president, we know where he stands, but the sands in the hourglass will descend rapidly after the by-election. And he will be a lame duck. And the two new candidates, and I would imagine they would be candidates who haven't run for the presidency before. In other words, I think it's unlikely that Vice President Harris will be the Democratic nominee again. These will be new personalities at the presidential level. I think they should be asked, should we continue under the road where we've gone? And it has been a situation that predates the Trump presidency, but it has certainly been exacerbated by the Trump presidency.
Well, indeed it has, and I wonder whether, given that it's been exacerbated by this particular president, that any subsequent president or even nominee that emerges is quite attracted to the idea.
I'm sure they will be enormously attracted to it, but they should be put on record. And this would involve the editorial boards of the great newspapers. It could involve SPIA, but they should be invited. And a distinguished professor of political science should ask, one of them is going to be president of the United States, what do you believe? Hasn't the power of the executive overtaken the legitimate power of the Congress?
Well, what about ethics? I mean, the fact of the matter is that we have a president who's getting rich off of Bitcoins and using the south lawn of the White House to sell Teslas, and yet he's, decimating all kinds of credits for EVs. It's just unbelievable that this is the same.
What mechanisms exist, if
Executive.
any, to challenge that? Because you're talking about something that is to do with the ways things have been done before, but also about the kind of moral issue almost. You're talking about a way of being.
But yeah, but we have laws.
Yes, so that's what I mean. So what? Okay, so is any of that
Separation
happening?
of, seemingly not, but I know that they are in the courts. Look, there's over 100 court cases and they're being filed all the time. It takes time to go through the court system, and we also are finding the intimidation of the judiciary to be another problem. But us not calling out the ethics of all of this on top of just the sheer rule of law governing is something I think is awesome.
I think the courts should litigate the issue of the emoluments clause.
Right.
And
Which was an issue in the first presidency.
yes, but it never matured. So I think that could occur again. I served on the House Ethics Committee.
So just for those who don't know what the emoluments clause is, it's about benefiting from being in office as the president, right?
The real question was foreign governments would rent the ballroom of the Trump Hotel. It's now, I guess, become a Waldorf Astoria, but it now may become a Trump Hotel again.
Yeah, but the People's House is the White House, and on the lawn of the White House to be talking about Tesla was just totally unethical, inappropriate. You go on, immoral, whatever you want.
But I think that the courts will reach the emoluments clause issue. I was on the House Ethics Committee. Unlike Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce, nobody volunteers to go on the House Ethics Committee. Paul Ryan put me on the House Ethics Committee, and I thought I had a friendly relationship with Paul Ryan.
Punitive. This is
we have excellent ethics rules in the Congress, and I want the public to know that. And for example, if you write a book in Congress, you can write the book and you can get the royalties, but the royalties have to be commensurate with what royalties would be by a person not in Congress. In other words, there cannot be a sweetheart deal. Might I suggest that is not necessarily the case with the judiciary. Now, we have no control over the ethics of the President of the United States, and arguably, other than the emoluments clause, that will have to be decided by the voters, and maybe the voters will punish my political party because of what Terri has just said. But I think that it's important to recognize that in both the House and the Senate, we lead the charge. We're better than the judiciary, and we're better than the executive branch in ethics. And many people believe people in Congress are a little fishy.
or benefit from stocks and there's other
How,
costs.
how can that manifest itself in real terms in terms of your engagement with the public?
Well, I point out at town hall meetings that I think we have a better ethical regimen than the other two branches of government. And regarding stocks, we are required to report monthly on our stock trades. It's known as periodic transaction reports. And a lot of people have gotten into trouble because they don't make the monthly reports. And it is a completely bipartisan committee. It's 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And I want the public to know, including the audience here at SPIA, that I am proud of how the ethics committees work in both the House and the Senate.
So a number of years ago, Tip O'Neill was speaker, and he asked a Texas congressman named Charlie Wilson to go on the ethics committee. Wilson replied, "I can't. I'm on the other side on that issue." Despite that quip,
I was on the good side of that.
despite that quip, though, it actually is a committee that has a lot of teeth, as Matt Gaetz came to learn. It is the biggest reason why he ultimately chose to leave the Congress. But look, if we're gonna just kind of not to belabor this point and kind of get back to this moment of where we are, only 2 months and a week into this presidency, while I expressed real optimism specifically on the impoundments issue and how that will be resolved in the courts, I am less optimistic, not necessarily pessimistic, but definitely less optimistic on the larger point of Trump attempting to do everything he can to challenge the system so that he can have all of the power. I take Trump at his word when he speaks openly and glowingly about the other world leaders he admires. We know who they are: Putin, Erdogan, Kim Jong-un, leader of Hungary, etc. And then he beats up, going back to the first term, Angela Merkel and Theresa May, when she was British Prime Minister, which was like 17 prime ministers ago in the UK. I'm not doing that. Putin's the one that didn't outlast lettuce. And even now, whether it was now former Prime Minister Trudeau or other European leaders, the reality is Donald Trump speaks openly about the fact that he reveres the strongmen in the world. And he is challenging the system right now in order to have as much power as possible. So this is a true test and a serious moment for our constitutional republic.
Leonard, does that concern you? Do you accept some of the things that?
Yes, I do not admire the personalities that Brendan has just mentioned, and I think it was only 4 prime ministers ago. But I have great confidence in the fact that the wheel turns. I say, perhaps I'm unfortunate from my perspective, but I believe the Democrats will control the House. I don't think it's going to be by 50, but I think it might be by 10 or 15. I don't think it's going to be by 2 or 3.
There are simply far fewer competitive seats
Right.
today, even.
The real problem, ladies and gentlemen, is gerrymandering. There's so few seats that are competitive. In this state, in New Jersey, we have 12 seats, and 11 are completely non-competitive. And I can tell you today who's going to win 11 of those 12 seats a year from November. I don't know the personalities because perhaps someone will retire or unfortunately might pass, but I can tell you who's going to win 11 of the 12 seats. And the only competitive seat is the seat I held. And the real problem in this country regarding the Congress is gerrymandering. And so many states gerrymander. And for example, North Carolina, its state legislature gerrymanders in favor of the Republicans. In California and in Illinois, gerrymandered in favor of the Democrats. There's a study, I think people here at Princeton have been involved in this, but there's a study, the House efficiency gap. Are you familiar with that concept? It's the seats that
Wasted votes.
Yes,
Wait,
right.
California, 4.5 seats more for the Democrats than they really should have. Illinois 3.5, New York 2.2, New Jersey 2.0. On the Republican offenders, North Carolina 2.4, Wisconsin 1.8, Florida 1.8, Georgia 1.3. I think North Carolina is the most egregious. And this produces cynicism with the public. Congressman Sarbanes had major legislation that would bring about gerrymandering reform. Passed the House twice, 2 Congresses, never passed the Senate. It didn't pass the Senate because of the filibuster. Now, this may be very controversial to this audience, but I am publicly, and have been for quite some time, opposed to the filibuster. Well, Democrats right now like the filibuster because of the Senate. But I am opposed to the filibuster, and those who oppose the filibuster in the Senate it changes political party depending upon who.
And it's like. Okay, I know we've been interrupted and we've had interventions from the audience, which we are quite relieved is no longer taking place in quite the way that it did. But now you can have your say. So questions, I think we've probably got about 10 minutes or so. I'm gonna go there in the middle and then here.
Thank you so much, all three of you. This has been great. I want to expand on a point from Congressman Lance that it seems to me so many of the real problems might be those structural issues of the government itself, because it is somewhat shocking to hear, like, this is the most powerful branch. Like, your job is in theory the most powerful one in the world. Exactly. And you guys are kind of relegated to advocacy, to saying, you know, this thing Trump did is bad, and it might be true, but is there a need to focus more maybe on fixing Congress itself? Like, for example, how I remember Derek Kilmer came here one time and he talked about no more C-SPAN at the committee hearings, or let's all eat in the same room. Are those priorities?
I think is the question. Scope for reform of Congress?
Yes, is that something top of mind?
Yeah, and there are a lot of different forms that can take. First, I mean, I think that say we're relegated to just being advocates, I think that overstates the matters. But I take your point, because as I've observed, I think over the last 25 years at least, there's been a migration of some powers to the executive. So that's the first thing. The second I would say is that you have some unique circumstances right now regarding Trump attempting to seize, as well as aided by Elon Musk and the frat bros, as much unilateral power as possible. That said, there are still those checks in place. I voted against, and this ended up being an internally controversial thing. I voted, as did 99.5% of House Democrats, vote against the budget resolution or the continuing resolution, because I wanted to use that as leverage to force this debate right here and right now. We will have a vote. Yeah. So, I mean, it was 214 out of 215 of us, I think, on the House Democrat side. Senate Democrats had a slightly different view. But there will be other moments. Debt ceiling, as well as we will have the government funding in front of us again September 30th. And then there are other must-pass pieces of legislation. But here's the thing I want you to understand is that about 3% of the members get about 97% of the media attention. And the inverse is also the truth. That 97% of the members get about 3% of the attention. Who gets the attention? I think we can name a few, what I would say, exotic personalities, who frankly, I would say are more interested in being performance artists than legislators. Actually, away from the glare of the camera, believe it or not, there are real pieces of legislation getting passed every single week. I, as a member of the minority, had a piece of legislation, my lead co-sponsor was my Republican counterpart, passed a Republican House, passed a Republican Senate, signed by a Democratic president, to reform the way the Congressional Budget Office works. Now, that's not a sexy issue. Like, no one's going to scream on MSNBC or Fox News about my CBO data sharing act. However, it's enormously important. And those sorts of things, believe it or not, still happen. They just don't get any attention.
I wanna get in as many questions as possible so that not to have each of you to answer every single one. So here, and then there, and then back. Maybe over there.
Thank you so much for taking my question. So I just wanted to quickly address the fact that our president has a tendency to lie, especially in a lot of different situations. For example, lying to you as consumers about what are the role of tariffs and how tariffs actually work. That's just one example. So my question is, given what we've seen here today in terms of how people have chosen to express their distaste about certain issues, my question is, how can we, as constituents of this presidency, hold our elected officials accountable, and then also in your role as being in Congress, how do you see yourselves holding our president accountable, both on the side of the Democrats and the Republicans?
Thank you. Do you want to pass the microphone back? Terry?
I don't think there's going to be much criticism on the Republican side, particularly in the House, until November of 2026, for reasons you can understand, and we can debate whether that's good or bad, like you've asked my position. But I think there will be some criticism in the Senate. For example, I think Senator Wicker is going to hold a hearing on the divulging of war plans. And I know Roger Wicker, and I think he's a very able member of the Senate. I suspect that will happen. And then inevitably, in the last 2 years, Republicans in the House, who I think will then be in the minority, I think they will begin to ask questions as well. But let me give you an example to Brendan's point about the people who really do the work. There's going to be a huge debate on Medicaid funding.
Yes.
And the committee, Energy and Commerce, has been asked to come up with $880 billion, almost $1 trillion.
And 90% of the funding for your committee is what? Medicaid?
Well, a good deal is Medicaid, and 90% of the expanded Medicaid is paid for at the federal level. Now, other than the professors, does anybody in the room know who the chairman of Energy and Commerce is in the House of Representatives? Not professors. Young man in the back.
Frank Pallone.
No, he most certainly is not. Now, does anybody know who the current chair of, I think, the most important committee, or maybe the second most important committee in the House? The chair is a close friend of mine, an extremely able member, Brett Guthrie of Bowling Green, Kentucky. You never see Brett Guthrie on television. We came in the same day. He is a very close friend of mine. He's a little more conservative than I am, but he is in no way an extremist. And he has a very important job over the next several months. And an audience at Princeton should know who Brett Guthrie is over Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah. Who's got the microphone?
Hi, I have it. Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for taking my question. Although it is a little disappointing, some people here express more discomfort with a few disruptions than a genocide. But I wanted to ask Terri Sewell, why did you vote to send billions of dollars to Israel when they were violating the Leahy Law? And does the legacy of John Lewis support funding Israel and their indiscriminate killing of Palestinians in Gaza?
I question the underlying premise of your question, and I would venture to guess, and John Lewis is no longer here, but John was in favor of generally supporting Israel as a very important partner in the Middle East. None of us support genocide. None of us support genocide. And the reason I voted in favor of the funding for Israel was the importance of being able to, and it was balanced funding, because it wasn't just for weaponry, it was also for humanitarian support and aid for what was going on there, as well as all of the national security stuff that we needed in order to get the hospitals mean, it's not as pure as $1 going just to one place.
But you also acknowledge that humanitarian aid was to be prevented by Israel. So whatever money you were sending was not being used for the cause it was being sent for.
And I also can say the same thing about my SNAP benefits. When people say that SNAP is always the welfare queen that people think about, or that time when they were standing in line and they had bologna and somebody in front of them pulled out an EBT card and they had steak. My job is to know who are the beneficiaries of that money. And the beneficiaries of that money were not just Israeli. And just like the benefits of the target for SNAP benefits, in my district, the face of SNAP benefits, SNAP is food stamps, for those who don't know what SNAP is. The face is children. 70% of the people who are on SNAP benefits are children. I can no more stop that mother from selling that EBT card for drugs than I can for all the money that goes to anywhere that we send money and appropriate money to. But here's what I know. I can make sure that that mother has access to nutritious food for those children.
Hi, I can be loud. Hopefully, people can hear me. Oh, it's on. Well, I have a question. I took Professor Lee's class last year where we simulated a Senate. And I played the role of a senator for Rhode Island. And I was really
easy. You guys just sat and didn't do
not really over there, but we got a lot done. Granted, I don't think we're necessarily.
Imitating the house.
Granted, I don't think we necessarily were totally representative. But I'm curious what your takes on polarization are, because a group of Princetonians trying to figure it out. We got a lot done. We talked with one another. And I'm curious why there's so much polarization with your colleagues across the aisle. And if you think there's any ways that that can be mediated.
I think so. Can I just say, I think that there's, as Brendan said, there's more stuff that's getting on that never gets on television that's getting done. So for example, on Ways and Means, I think almost 100% we all want telehealth to be fully funded. We saw the benefits of telehealth during the COVID, Republicans and Democrats alike. Now, do we want it permanent? People like us want it permanent. Is it going to get permanent during this 4-year period? The answer is hell no. So we have to get used to passing it year after year after year after year. But year after year, you're going to see Republicans and Democrats speaking up about that. Same is true with child tax credit. I can go on and on and on about those things that we agree on. And they get done because they have to get done and because they're good policy. I think that I'd like to think I was a lone Democrat until recently in Alabama's delegation. Now I'm the senior member of Alabama's Democratic delegation. But there was no way in the 14 years that I've been in Congress, many bills that I passed, many that have to do with Black history and voting rights and civil rights and all that stuff, I got done with bipartisan support, which started in my own caucus, my own delegation. And if I had and my whole strategy, my delegation meets once a month for lunch. And it was amazing how it changed, that lunch changed once a month for lunch for the last 30 years. And Alabama's delegation used to be full of Dixiecrats and a few Republicans. Now it's all Republicans and 2 Democrats. And they've been doing this for 30 plus years. And I could choose not to go to that, or I could choose to go to that and not focus on that which we disagree on, but focus on that which we agree on, and also bring up legislation that I hope to get their support on, and use that as an opportunity to advocate for the people back home, to other people who are from home. And I chose to do the latter. And I have to tell you that through the course of that, we got to know each other as people, not as R&D. But as Terri and Robert Adderholt, we got to know each other. In fact, I'm going back tomorrow early because I'm going to Robert Adderholt's daughter's wedding, because I watched her grow up in 14 years, and Mary Elliot's getting married. I don't know if you know that, but anyway, I'm going happily going to that wedding, and we disagree on 90% of the issues. But the 10% that we can work together on, we work vigorously on. And if that's everything from giving a congressional gold medal to the 4 little girls who were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church at the 50th anniversary of that event, to something as serious as saving rural hospitals and access to greater transportation, modes of transportation for healthcare. And so, and even with Jody Arrington, who is the chair of budget, and I know is your counterpart, but Jody and I have a bill that almost passed last Congress. It had 320 co-sponsors on the House side, 63 on the Senate side. It was a multi-cancer early detection bill. You were on it. Everybody was on it from Ways and Means. We unanimously passed it out of committee. And but there's a rule. Why did it not go through? It didn't go through because it was a part of a year-end package that had been negotiated in good favor by the Democrats and the Republicans. It was about to be put on the floor, and Elon Musk, through a tweet, said it was horrible. This is back in December, y'all remember that, and it blew up that deal. So my bill had to be reintroduced this Congress, and so Jody, because the Republicans are now in charge of the House, he wanted to introduce the bill because it was, and I proceeded to say to him, "Okay, Jody, you can introduce it, but we're still gonna get as many sponsors as we need, and we need to do X, Y, and Z, and we're gonna ask your staff, but we're not gonna rely on your staff to help us to get that across it, as long as you're okay with that." He said, "Fine." I said I had to pray about it. And then the day he decided to file that bill, he asked me to look at it on the floor. And I said, "Jody, it's the same bill that we filed last Congress, right?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I don't have to see it." And he said, "No, I think you want to look at it." And I looked down, and there he had renamed the bill the Nancy Gardner Sewell Multi-Cancer Early Detection Bill, after my mom who had lost her life to pancreatic cancer. And I looked at him and I said, "I didn't ask you to name the bill after my mom." And he said, "I know, but I want everyone to know that this is the Sewell bill. You worked so hard last Congress for it, just when you want to hate folks." So what I'm saying is, at some point, Congress would work better if we saw each other as individuals and represented people, and not as Republicans and Democrats with ideological views that dominate everything we do, because frankly, it doesn't dominate everything we do.
Let me just add, because it's a great question, and you took my teasing about the Senate very well. It was not personal to you. When you asked about structural impediments, because there's no question, there are a number of metrics that show this. Cross-party voting today is at an all-time low. There is a structural reason why, and that is, if you take the two-party system from roughly the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 on to the present day, it was the case for most of that history. You had two more ideologically heterodox parties. You had liberal Democrats, sure, but you also had conservative Democrats, especially coming from the South, and you had moderate Democrats. And the same was true on the Republican side. You had liberal Republicans, especially in suburban Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, New England. You had moderate Republicans and conservative Republicans. What has happened really ever since it began in the late 60s, 1970s, and it took over about a generation or two. You saw a lot of conservative Democrats swept out in 1994. Even as late as that 06 to 2010 period, you had a number of more moderate Democrats. Take the issue of abortion, by the way. You actually had a lot of pro-life Democrats and a lot of pro-choice Republicans in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even when Barack Obama passed Obamacare. Now, both parties have ideologically purified themselves. So guess what? That makes it a lot more difficult to achieve a bipartisan vote, because whereas before a Democrat could maybe go to a conservative Republican and say, "Oh, this represents our geography, let's vote together." Or a speaker like Tip O'Neill I referenced before, he had a big Democratic majority, but it was very ideologically diverse. Nowadays, and ironically, a lot of political scientists over the years wanted two American political parties that would be ideologically pure for a variety of reasons. It would presumably better reflect where the public was. However, that actually has proven to be a pretty big structural impediment to achieving bipartisan votes.
Fascinating moment on which to end. I'm being told that we have to bring this session to a close. Thank you.